Congratulations, you've just found the number one over 50 health and wellness podcast on the planet. Hello, and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a healthy aging expert and the founder of The Silver Edge, and I am on a mission to help men and women just like you build lean, strong, healthy, capable bodies they love for the rest of their lives. Today's episode lands just a few days before Election Day here in the United States. And while I'm not going to dive into the political fray, I do want to address something critical to the intersection of health and politics, and that's a conversation about where our healthcare dollars go and how this impacts each of us. Here's a staggering fact. Here in the US, we spend $4.5 trillion annually on healthcare. That's a number so large, it's hard to even comprehend. But here's the real shocker. 86% of that spend goes towards treating lifestyle diseases, conditions that are, for the most part, preventable through better lifestyle choices. And yet, we're at a place where only 12% of Americans are considered metabolically healthy. In today's episode, I'll walk you through some tough realities and ask the big question: what can you and I do to reclaim our health and become leaders in this movement? I'll share some simple, actionable steps to help you live leaner, stronger, and healthier in the second half of your lives. Because at the end of the day, real health reform starts with us, making daily choices that break free from a culture built around keeping us dependent on quick fixes and fleeting comforts. So buckle up for an eye-opening episode as we explore what it takes to truly make America healthy again. This podcast is coming out less than a week before Election Day here in the United States, and I, for one, will be thrilled to see it behind us. Let me start out by acknowledging that we have a global audience with this podcast. I can see the podcast stats. I see all of you that are not in the United States, but I'm hoping that we can have this conversation that seems to be going on here in the US right now, especially as we get close to our election day. So that's right around the corner for those of us here in the US, but I don't want to talk about our election madness with this episode, but I do want to talk about the intersection of politics and our health. So with that said, let's start here. Here in the United States, we spend $4.5 trillion on healthcare annually. Now, I think it's helpful to put this in perspective because this number gets bandied about a lot, right? You've probably heard that statistic somewhere else. 4.5 trillion. Wow, that's a lot. But most people, myself included, have a hard time conceptualizing what's a trillion. What's $4.5 trillion? How much is that really? So here's how I like to think about when I think about millions and billions and trillions. Think of it this way. We're going to compare millions, billions, and trillions in terms of time, in terms of seconds. So 1 million seconds is about 11 and a half days. So there's some perspective. That's a lot of seconds, right? So there's 60 seconds in a minute, on, and it takes about 11 and a half days to get through 1 million seconds. Now, 1 billion seconds is about 31 years and 8 months. So that's how much bigger a billion is than a million. That's pretty significant, right? But get this, a trillion seconds is about 31,710 years. So if we think about what was happening 31,710 years ago, that's about 29,000 BC. That's a long time ago. That's a lot of seconds. So when I say we spend $4.5 trillion on healthcare annually, here in the US alone, that's a lot of money. That's a tremendous amount of money. That's not an inconsequential amount of money. Now, furthermore, of that 4.5 trillion that we spend on healthcare annually, about 86% of those costs are for treating, and those of you in podcast land, I'm going to use exaggerated quote marks with my fingers here, treating metabolic diseases. In other words, these are lifestyle diseases. These are just diseases that are caused by poor lifestyle choices. 86 freaking percent. Now, if my math is correct, that's damn near $3.9 trillion. So just about $4 trillion of those $4.5 trillion that we're spending here annually in the US are used to quote unquote treat, again with the exaggerated finger quote marks in the air, metabolic diseases. And to be clear, we're not treating them. We're not curing them. And we'll get to that more in a minute. But according to the CDC, so for those of you globally, that's the Center for Disease Control here in the US, 73.6% of American adults are either classified as overweight or obese. And the CDC goes on to say that 42% of us are classified as actually being obese. So almost half of those of us in the US are now classified as being obese. Get this, here's a very chilling statistic. Only 12% of Americans are considered metabolically healthy. Let that sink in. 12% of Americans are considered metabolically healthy, meaning they don't have any metabolic dysfunction whatsoever. 12 freaking percent. 50% of adults have pre-diabetes or full-blown type 2 diabetes. That number was 1% back in 1950. Half of Americans are now expected to have cancer in our lifetime, with young adult cancer rising 79% in the last 10 years. Infertility is skyrocketing, and our lifespans are actually dropping. Clearly, something is horribly, horribly wrong. America is very unhealthy, and our condition is getting worse. But what's going on? And more importantly, what can you and I do to make America healthy again? All right, so let's start with the root causes of our crappy and rapidly declining health. The causes are, of course, complicated. They're multifactorial, but let's break this down into three big categories: food, lifestyle, and environment. And let's start with food. And this picture is grim. On average, 73% of our diet here in the US comes from processed and ultra-processed foods. And what this means is the vast majority of foods, and again, those of you out there in podcast land, I'm using exaggerated air quotes. So the vast majority of the quote unquote foods we eat are not real foods at all, but rather they're chemical concoctions that are calorically dense and nutrient sparse, which is the exact opposite of what we want. Additionally, these processed foods are chock full of artificial flavors, sweeteners, coloring, and preservatives. A recent study that was really well done found that when we eat processed foods, we tend to overeat by 500 calories a day compared to when we select real whole foods. 500 calories a day. Now, those of you out there that are not nutrition nerds, if we say 500 calories a day surplus, that's like a pound a week. I mean, there's some metabolic factors and that's not perfect math, but just in general, if you were to overeat 500 calories, in other words, being a 500 calorie surplus for 52 weeks of the year, you're going to gain a lot of weight, okay? And it's no wonder we eat so many processed foods. Food companies hire PhD chemists to perfect what they call the bliss point, which is making food not only delicious, but addictive. And then, of course, they spend billions and billions of dollars advertising these frankenfoods to us. Now, I'm going to ask you this question. When's the last time you saw a compelling ad for a sweet potato? You just don't see that, right? But now look at all the other foods that are being advertised to us. They're not real whole nutritious foods. They're frankenfoods. They're these foods that these food companies have made up, these frankenfoods, to sell us. All right, so that's the bleak picture there with food. Let's move on to lifestyle. And when I say lifestyle, especially as a problem here in our declining health, it's namely our largely sedentary lifestyle. Most of us sit the majority of the day. We sit in our cars on our commute to work, then we sit at our desk for 8 hours, then we go home and we're exhausted and we're wiped out and we take a well-deserved break on the couch. Not exactly a recipe for building and maintaining a lean, strong, healthy body. Now, most of us aren't getting anywhere near the general prescription of 10,000 steps a day, let alone performing any kind of regular strength training. Over 3/4 of US adults don't do any strength training activity whatsoever, which of course leads to sarcopenia and osteopenia. And this number is in all adults. And that number, of course, is much smaller when we look at men and women over 50. If you're not familiar with the terms sarcopenia and osteopenia, sarcopenia just refers to age-related muscle loss, and osteopenia, of course, being age-related bone density or bone weakening, bone loss, right? And both of those, although the definition is age-related, again, I'm doing my air quotes here, they're not age-related, they are lifestyle-related. Now look, aging's undefeated. We are all going to become frailer at some point in our life, but it's not now. It's not you in your 50s and 60s. Maybe when you're 90, you'll have an excuse to say, yeah, time caught up with me, but you don't today. Not in your 50s and 60s. It's because of these lifestyle factors and not because of father time here that we're experiencing sarcopenia or osteopenia or poor metabolic health or obesity, etc., etc. All right, so there's the picture on our diet. There's the picture on our crappy lifestyle here in the US. And finally, we come to our environment. Not only is our food supply being poisoned, as in literally poisoned, I mean, the US allows ingredients in our food that other countries declare outright illegal, but it's estimated that here in the US, we spray over 1 billion pounds. Remember, we just defined what a billion is, how big that number is. We spray 1 billion pounds of pesticide on our food crops annually. But toxins and endocrine disruptors are literally everywhere. They're in our hygiene and our beauty products. They're in all of our plastic, yes, even your BPA-free plastic water bottle. They're in our kitchen pots and pans. They're in our cleaning supplies. They're in our water. They're in our furniture, in our clothing. We're actually swimming in a sea of toxic chemicals. And look, to be fair, our bodies are amazing machines. We are really good at removing toxins, but we weren't built for this kind of toxic onslaught. And so what we have then is this perfect storm. We no longer eat real, whole, nourishing food. We're mostly sedentary, and we're surrounded by a plethora of toxic chemicals. And this is fantastic for healthcare providers and pharma shareholders. We are literally cash cows for the medical pharma machine, especially as we age up, those of us in our 50s and 60s and older. And here's where politics and industry come into play. You and I are worth an obscene amount of money when we're sick. Our healthcare here in the US is second to none when it comes to acute disease and injury. Look, if I get in a car crash or fall down and break my leg, I want to be in the United States and rushed on one of our amazing ambulances to one of our amazing medical facilities. But we are horrendous at managing, and I'm going to use my air quotes here, metabolic disease. Things like obesity, insulin resistance and diabetes, high cholesterol, some cancers, high blood pressure, even Alzheimer's disease, which some researchers are now calling type 3 diabetes. Our medical and pharma systems treat the symptoms of these diseases without curing them. Which again, this is a fabulous business model if you want to get ridiculously wealthy. And for the record, I don't believe that there's this vast world conspiracy with evil drug makers and medical systems and maybe even food producer kingpins. I don't think they're gathered in their secret headquarters, wringing their hands with glee, wondering how they can make us sicker so they can sell us more crappy food, pills, and potions. But there is a very real, very ugly financial reality around our value as patients. Let's go back to that $4.5 trillion and growing, by the way, in healthcare spending. Remember that 86% of that is to treat, you in podcast land, I'm once again using my exaggerated air quotes here, to treat metabolic diseases. That is to say lifestyle diseases, right? So these are diseases brought on by our unhealthy choices. So almost $4 trillion we're spending annually to treat, quote unquote, treat lifestyle diseases. What would happen if we all decide tomorrow morning we wake up and every single one of us here in the US says, we're going to get healthy. We're going to eat real whole foods that nourish our bodies. We're going to exercise appropriately, and we're going to do our best to avoid toxins at all costs. There are some very powerful billionaires and multi-billionaires that don't want that to happen. I don't think that's any one person. Like, it's not the CEO of Pfizer. I don't know who that is. I doubt that's an evil person. But when we talk about these businesses, the sad and scary financial reality is they profit off of you and I being sick. So what would happen if all of us got healthy all at once? What would happen to that $4 trillion that we're all spending to treat metabolic lifestyle diseases? Now, sadly, I don't think the medical and pharma companies and the food companies are staying up late at night. Their CEOs meeting together. That maybe they're on a Zoom call all together, worried. Oh no, what happens when everybody gets healthy? I don't think they need to worry that much. And I look at it this way. On one hand, we're being bullied by the medical food pharma system. They control the food, they manufacture the poisons, and then they sell us the cure. They sell us this very expensive cure that doesn't really cure anything. It only alleviates symptoms temporarily. And the real money, of course, is in having customers for life. So yeah, on one hand, I think it's fair to say we are being bullied by industry. But on the other hand, I think we the people are to blame. We have flat out traded our health for convenience and fleeting pleasure. Most of us know what healthy choices are, but we're seduced by modern culture and predatory marketers. All right, so let's wrap this diatribe up. Where does politics come all into this, right? Let's make this really fun. What role should the government play in this scenario? Now, before I continue, I suppose it's only fair to warn you of my natural bias. And this probably isn't going to be a shocker to those of you that have followed me for a while or listened to this podcast for a while. I'm actually a card-carrying libertarian. To say that I believe our government can, or should for that matter, save us from this dire situation would be a stretch to say the least. But with that disclaimer out of the way, with my natural bias now out in the open here, look what our country has done with smoking. I mean, seriously, in our lifetimes, we've seen smoking and smoking-related deaths and illnesses go from very common to very rare. Could we do the same thing with obesity and lifestyle illnesses? What if we allocate some of that $4.5 trillion frickin' dollars to education and healthy programs? What if we put a tariff on Coca-Cola and Lucky Charms and Pop-Tarts? And again, with my libertarian leanings, I'm not advocating for more government regulation, but I'm saying we have a full-blown healthcare crisis in this country. And what if instead of coming up with ways to pay for all of this, we actually funded healthy programs and activities? Most of our insurers won't pay for a personal trainer or a nutrition coach, but they'll gladly pay out a lifetime of statin prescriptions. Think about that. Does that sound right to you? That your insurer wouldn't pay, a couple $100 a month for a good personal trainer or for a nutrition coach, but they'll gladly pump out thousands of dollars in high blood pressure med and cholesterol meds and all of these other medicines to quote unquote treat your lifestyle diseases. But here's the deal. I don't believe our government's going to save us, no matter which candidate you choose. And as you probably guess, I am in fact an RFK Jr. fan, and I do believe that he'd at least fight the good fight. But my personal optimism for making America healthy again does not come down to who wins this election. Instead, my faith lies with you. Yes, you and people like you. My faith lies in us. Look, you tuned into a podcast titled The Over 50 Health and Wellness Show, so you at least care about being healthy. And my faith is in we the people. We're all getting ready to vote. And look, with early voting, a lot of us have already voted. But keep in mind, we actually vote every single day with our attention and with our wallets. Corporate greed and shitty systems only exist because we continue to feed the beast. If we wake up and rise up, we can make ourselves, our families, our communities, our nation, our entire world healthy again. But this starts with you and me. It doesn't start with the president or their political appointees. They work for us. This movement is about us. It's led by us, and we have the power to dictate the rules. And look, I'm optimistic here. There seems to be some grassroots rising already. If you look at people like Dr. Casey Means, if you look at the Food Babe, RFK Jr., some of these people have huge platforms, and they are sounding the alarm for us. So there seems to be a little bit of momentum of this healthy, this health consciousness movement rising here. But let's back up and let's just face a harsh reality. We are not so much victims of a global conspiracy to keep us fat and sick, as much as it feels that way sometimes. We're willing participants. When it comes to metabolic health, nobody can take that away from you. You have to surrender it. So here's my call to action. Choose the red pill. Break free from the matrix and reclaim your health. Reclaim the health of your family and your loved ones. Don't be a jerk about it, but rather set a noble example for others to follow. Be an agent for healthy change in the world. Be a healthy aging leader for your family, your loved one, and your peers. And in spite of what social media and the popular press tells you, being healthy really isn't that difficult, and it's not that complicated. Let's start here. As much as possible, commit to eating real whole foods that nourish your body and make sure you get plenty of healthy protein in every single meal. Walk a minimum of 7,000 steps every day. Strength train 3 days a week. Educate yourself about environmental toxins and do your best to avoid them. Work on managing your stress. Sleep for a minimum of 7 hours every night. That's it. You don't really need anything else to get started. Just do those simple things and you'll be a member of the Silver Edge Rebel Army. And make no mistake, there is a war going on, a war for your mind and your health. And you are a soldier, whether you're a willing participant or not. Let's fight to make America and the world healthy again. Okay, that's our show for today, folks. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I want to let you know that we have other free resources over at silveredgefree.com. There, you'll find our free guides with our top tips on nutrition, exercise, and healthy lifestyle to assist you in your weight loss and fitness journey. So feel free to head over there and download anything that looks useful to you. I'll put links to everything we talked about in the show notes, and you folks can find those over at silveredgefitness.com/306. As we wrap up our time together today, you can show your support for this show in two important ways. The first is to tell a friend about this podcast and encourage them to give it a listen. The second is for you YouTube folks to click the like and subscribe buttons, and for you podcast folks to please give this podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, and be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.